London, England, the birthplace of democracy, where people for centuries have lived in harmony, the right to speak openly, to enjoy freedom of choice, to live and let live, and to experience the virtues of democracy. Mankind has moved on rapidly throughout time. Right here in Britain, the Industrial Revolution began, that in turn led to an advanced technological age, enjoyed by all of humanity throughout the developed world today. But mankind has paid a hefty price for how we live now, and for the democratic rights that millions of people around the globe take for granted every day. A century ago, the rapidly progressing mechanised nations of the world were split by jealous rivalry and bitter division. A great conflict loomed. At the conflict that would pitch ordinary working-class men against each other on a scale unprecedented. In 1914, the First World War began. Described as the war to end all wars, its effects were far-reaching and long-lasting.
The First World War was astonishing. It pitted millions of men against each other. In Great Britain, for example, the Minister of War, Kitchener, knew that the British Army wouldn't hold out on the Western Front, and he famously launched a very, very large recruitment drive. Hundreds of thousands of men from Great Britain, all over the island, different parts, the coal mines, textile workers, agricultural workers, joined en masse in a fever of patriotism. And to be perfectly honest, the vast majority of these men had never even fired a rifle. In fact, they wouldn't have known one end of a gun from another.
The men of Kitchener's new armies undertook relatively short periods of training. Civilian soldiers found themselves marching towards the front lines within months of enlisting. And as the war progressed, the training periods became shorter. The men became older, and within weeks of joining up, many of them marched off to their deaths.
The White Cliffs of Dover conjure up perhaps one of the most stirring and enduring images of Great Britain in its past. This small island nation went on to form a huge colonial empire that, for good or bad, still affects much of the world today. The First World War has been described by many historians as a European war, a continental conflict. But there were many theatres of war all over the world. One of the largest took place just a short distance from here, across this stretch of water, the English Channel, in France and Flanders. The millions of men who fought in that war weren't just from the British Isles. They came from all over the world, as we shall see. The Western Front, from Belgium behind me to northeast France in front of me. For the millions of men who passed through the Western Front, what started as an adventure very soon became living hell. The Western Front rapidly developed into a series of fortified lines made up of trench systems. It stretched from the coast at the English Channel all the way down to the Swiss border. The men had to live like animals in filthy, squalid conditions for 4 years.
Conditions in the trenches were horrendous. Rats fed upon the corpses of the dead men, and men were often covered in lice. Yet there was an enormous sense of brotherhood between them, one that only they could understand.
Here, in Delville Wood, in the infamous Somme region of France, the remnants of an old trench still exist today. It was here back in 1916 that men from the relatively newly formed South Africa fought with great determination and courage for the Allied cause. So why would men who lived many thousands of miles away come to fight here?
The modern flag of South Africa flies proudly over the national memorial to the dead of their nation, who fought here on the Western Front during both the two world wars. In 1910, the Union of South Africa was created. The Cape Colony, Transvaal, Natal and the Orange Free State united to form the Union, the forerunner of today's South Africa. The Union became a dominion of the British Empire on July 1st, 1910. Many men of British descent, alongside other South Africans, went on to fight for the Allied cause to defend democracy. It can be said that South Africa has a diverse population and an undoubted checkered history, but today the nation quite rightly acknowledges the sacrifices of its peoples. The flag flies here in true representation for the men of South Africa, who, no matter what their background, status or race had been, are all equal in the eye of their free and now independent, progressive modern country. They are certainly all equal in death.
The South African forces became the first multiracial military power to enter the conflict. They were made up of 4 regiments, each a battalion strength, but all of the troops were of European descent or origin.
The indigenous black South Africans also played a very significant role on the Western Front in World War I. Often unfairly treated and looked down upon, many of them also paid the ultimate price and gave their lives. They too were volunteers.
Black South Africans were not considered able or suitable to fight as frontline troops. Despite this, the black tribal leaders offered up their men to fight alongside their white countrymen. Their requests were denied. Instead, black South Africans served as labourers, many thousands of them. And of course, there is nothing to suggest that they would not have made very good fighting troops. But social policies were at the time full of prejudices, thankfully now eradicated. In July of 1916, the South African infantry fought a bloody battle here, often hand-to-hand combat. Over a 4-day period, of their force of 3,150 men, they had received 766 fatalities. Some of the graves around me symbolised their costliest action of the war. And yet their darkest day, and that of others, was yet to come. A fact not acknowledged by some historians.
After the horrors of Delville Wood, the South African infantry, who were themselves an integral part of the 9th Scottish Division within the British Army and the South African Native Labour Corps, marched northward. This old footage shows the men of the 4th South African Scottish Regiment on the road together with their animal mascots, the most famous one being Nancy the Springbok. And their destination? This now sleepy corner of northeastern France.
Rural France has always been a vast openness of space, with hundreds of villages just like this one dotted around. Fonpou is a typical type of village that thousands of men fought for during the war. After the horrendous slaughter of the Somme, the British and Commonwealth troops moved north, because in the spring of 1917 they're going to take part in another bloody battle at Arras.
The Battle of Arras commenced on the 9th of April 1917 and lasted for 39 days. Allenby's Third Army, they were the principal force for the British and Commonwealth troops in that battle.
It would be easy to lose oneself in the rolling French countryside. So I'm off to meet an old friend of mine, military historian John Duncan, a man who knows this area very well. He should give me an insight into what happened here all those years ago.
Hey John, you all right? Thanks. Thank you. So you got all your maps and your gadgets out?
Yeah, I got you today. Put your walking boots up.
So, whereabouts are we going to be going?
To this area here.
Right,
This is a map of the old battlefield.
right,
This is where we are here.
yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's. What do I need to take with us?
Couple of maps.
Couple of maps.
And just one wee box of tricks here.
Right. Let's get going then, John.
Okay.
Go see what we've got. Thing is, John, I can't help feeling that I've actually been here sometime before.
That's right, I had that feeling as well. It's strange, it's almost like deja vu. Corporal, looking for Captain Wilson. That was round in the park, thank you.
John, old chap, what a nice surprise.
Oh, sir.
Have you brought me those damn boots that you promised me the last time we met?
If only. Everything's very confused. Need to talk.
You're telling me. Am I glad to see you? We've lost too many officers who knew what was really going on here.
The fields just outside the eastern edge of the village of Formpu, on the far edge of the gently sloping Greenland hill, look very tranquil and serene today. Calm and peaceful springs to mind. But these fields will forever be stained with the blood of volunteer soldiers from the 9th Scottish Division. Ordinary working-class men who served under well-established and highly experienced military commanders.
The commander on the Western Front from late 1915 for the remainder of the war was Haig. Haig had enormous responsibility, and in 1916 he took a lot of the rap for the failures on the Somme. By 1917 he was under pressure once again from the French, who under General Robert Nivelle were asking him to make an offensive in the Arras region of France. This he did. And his commander there, and the commander of the Third Army, was General Edmund Allenby.
General Sir Edmund Allenby was a man with many years of military service behind him. He had been an accomplished commander of cavalry and was well known for his aggressive, offensive tactical decision-making. His bold demeanour led him to be known as the Bloody Bull. Having fought through the Second Boer War at the turn of the 20th century, he once again commanded a cavalry corps in the early days of World War I until he switched to command the Third Army. Bloody Bull Allenby then became responsible for volunteer infantrymen. They included the men of the 9th Scottish Division within that army. Allenby certainly believed that his storming offensive cavalry tactics could be translated to work with his infantry. On April 11th, 1917, disaster struck.
By the 11th of April, we were just 2 to 3 days into the battle. The Germans had already seized the initiative on the high ground and set up defensive positions around the villages of Rouen and Fampoux. Importantly, they held the railway station and the chemical works and the high ground at Greenland Hill. Allenby knew that to progress with his attack, he had to take these objectives. He failed to take these objectives.
Where this line of trees stands today, just outside Formpu, the men of the South African Infantry were assembled in readiness for a second offensive on April the 12th, after the costly and catastrophic failures of the previous day.
So, what's the reason you come across the lines? Don't tell me you come here to tell me how good the Bosch is.
No, we know all that already. The adjutant's very worried, but about the communications. The orders aren't clear at all.
Could have sent a runner to tell me. Why have they risked an officer coming through the lines? He could have been shot by a sniper. And besides, a runner wouldn't have forgotten the boots. I'd have had him on a charge.
Sorry about the boots, sir. Royal Scots are concerned. The attack's been postponed already. What are we letting ourselves in for?
God knows.
Greenland Hill. Despite the failed attack the previous day by the 4th Division, the 9th Scottish Division were ordered to attack on two flanks. The 9th Scottish Rifles and the 11th and 12th Royal Scots were to take the gently sloping hill that housed dozens of deadly German machine gunners. Meanwhile, To their right, the South Africans had been detailed to take the railway station close by in the neighbouring village of Ruhr. This dreadful place was also bristling with German machine gunners who received instructions from observers from the top of the 20-metre tower at the chemical works alongside.
Allenby hadn't taken the initiative on the 9th and 10th of April and had allowed the Germans to strengthen their defences. He sent out a force from the 4th Division, and it was horrendous. The attacking troops, mainly from the 2nd Seaforth Highlanders and the Royal Irish Fusiliers, hadn't got a chance. Communications were poor. The German defensive strategy was excellent. Incredibly, 90% of the Seaforths became casualties, including all their officers. It was a catastrophic defeat. Over 1,200 men became casualties. 90% from one battalion, with all their officers, should have told Allenby to hold back and to think again. Almost unbelievably, Allenby ordered a very similar attack for the following day, the 12th of April. This attack was to be led by the 9th Scottish Division.
Before any infantry attack, it was standard procedure for the divisional artillery to launch an initial bombardment. On April the 12th, Allenby had almost completely lost touch with his artillery commanders. Amidst the chaos, the infantry didn't receive the artillery support.
Sir, DHQ have been in contact, but to wait for artillery support on this attack. The snow's gone, but the ground's poor. And where's the artillery?
The snow may have gone, but my men are still suffering from exposure. We were supposed to go at 1200 hours. Now they say we should go at 1700 hours and form up in the village. Corporal.
Sir.
Get on the phone to DHQ. Ask them for clarification of this bombardment. Do it now, man.
Yes, sir.
Communications were almost non-existent. The artillery were incorrectly positioned as orders were confused. Contact with the infantry was shambolic.
Corporal, what's taking so damn long?
I can't get a line, sir.
Damn shambles. John, you're going to have to stay here, and that's an order.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to form the men up. Sergeant!
Just outside the village of Formpu, there is a sunken road where the men were expected to form up.
Right, come on, form up on the road.
It wouldn't have been expected by the British that they would have been spotted. But the Germans held complete air superiority, and it didn't take them long to find out where the British were forming up. They did exactly the same thing the day before. And within minutes of trying to form up, the Germans sent very heavy and very accurate artillery fire down onto those troops. This was before the battle even commenced.
I hold positions! Get back to the trench! Back to the trench! Get back to the trench! Pull back! Get back! Get back, come on! Get back to the trench! Keep it moving!
The South African infantrymen scrambled back to their trenches and had to quickly reorganise for a suicidal attack.
Come on! Help them down! Help them! Help them! Sit! Come on, help them down, I said! Get yourselves in! Get under cover! Keep down! Corporal, we can't get the wounded in under this fire. The assault will commence at 0 hour. Prepare for battle immediately.
Sir, action! Prepare to fix bayonets!
I said, bloody madness, we've not got a chance.
Bayonets!
Volunteer soldiers, conditioned to take orders without question, were more or less condemned to their deaths.
Men of the South African infantry, remember who you are. Remember what you have been through and what you are about to achieve. You are doing this for God and for your nation. You will always go forward, never backwards. Men, may God be with you. Come on, move!
Ordinary men, husbands, brothers, sons, the chap next door. Many with wives, children and families back home, scaled trench ladders to go over the top. We will never understand what went through their minds as they made their way towards the German machine guns that fired hundreds of rounds per minute straight at them. None of them are here anymore to tell us. Perhaps they quietly prayed to themselves. Maybe they called out the names of their loved ones. They went down at an alarming rate. But still they went on. Still they went on.
At 1700 hours, not an ideal time to go out and attack, the men went over the top. The 9th Scottish Rifles, the 11th and 12th Royal Scots, and the 1st, 2nd and 4th South African Infantry were sent like lambs to the slaughter. It was a suicidal operation. There was no way that there could ever be any success.
Stretch your bearers! Stretch your bearers! Not me, him! Look after him! Take the railway station! Take the railway station!
Only around a dozen or so brave South Africans made it to the railway station. The situation was hopeless. Within minutes, hundreds of Germans had surrounded them. They were blasted and bayoneted to death.
What happened, John? We got you out of it, sir.
Did they make it to the railway station?
Some of them did, sir. Some of them surely did.
I knew they would make it. What's happened to them now?
They're gone, sir. They're all gone.
I knew they would make it. They showed no fear. They were like lions. Like lions.
Greenland Hill and the surrounding area became the last place on earth for these brave volunteer soldiers. Now the secrets of its bloody past are revealed.
John, we've been walking in the footsteps of the men that perished all those years ago. I mean, it's very sorrowful, but it's difficult to explain.
It is. The men came out of the village and immediately came under a hurricane of fire. From up here, the railway station, the chemical works, the chateau, over to Mount Pleasant Wood and the woods beyond there.
But these men were all volunteers. They didn't sign up to die like that. They didn't sign up to just have their lives tossed away. I mean, it makes you angry.
It is. It's incredible. They were going down at a rate of about 1 every 4 or 5 seconds, and it was all over in about 30 minutes.
But the one that's even worse is these men knew beforehand what they were letting themselves in for. They knew that they were going to have to go through a hail of German bullets, but yet they still carried on.
In reality, they had little choice. If they disobeyed orders, they could have been shot for cowardice, but that said, they were exceptionally brave men.
The final resting place for many of the fallen of the 9th Scottish Division is here, at Brown's Copse, a very short distance from where the South Africans set off for their rendezvous with death.
Here we are, virtually at the exact spot where the South African Infantry, the 9th Scottish Division, set off towards almost certain death.
That's right, where many of them were actually buried. But like the Royal Scots and the Cameroonians on the left flank, they had no real choice. Orders had to be obeyed.
Did divisional artillery support them?
9th Division artillery had been one of the best of the war, but on this particular occasion, due to Allenby's incompetence, they were unable to move across the cut-up roads, and frankly, their efforts were pathetic.
Could anything else have been done to protect them?
Smoke screens could have been used, but they weren't on this occasion. The artillery was poorly zeroed and actually caused friendly casualties.
The frozen men of the 9th Scottish Division, unprotected, set off towards almost certain death. But they advanced with great courage, a courage that even their German counterparts couldn't fail to admire.
"1,400 men from Scotland and South Africa went down in 30 minutes. And as a result of that action, 400 of them died. This was as bad as anything that happened on the Somme the year before.
This is indeed a beautiful place, so opposite from the hell of the battles of April 11th and 12th, 1917, when so many men perished. Amongst the fallen here are 21-year-old Lieutenant Donald Mackintosh from Glasgow. Lieutenant Mackintosh was a gallant officer from the 2nd Seaforths. 9 out of 10 of those officers and men became casualties on April 11th. Young Mackintosh was hit 3 times by bullets. Unable to walk, he directed the few remaining men of his unit until the very end, when he was hit again. Lieutenant Mackintosh was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross. Perhaps the most tragic story here is that of a young boy soldier from a suburb of Johannesburg. William Tranter had travelled thousands of miles to be killed in a hail of machine gun bullets. He had advanced only 100 or so metres before he met his death. Young William had lied about his age to come and seek what he thought would be a great adventure. He would never have understood the mindless slaughter that he would become a tragic part of. Billy Tranter, of the 2nd South African Infantry, was just 16 years old. His death was totally and completely in vain. As John and I walked back towards Greenland Hill, we encountered Chili Trench Military Cemetery, one of hundreds of little Commonwealth War Grave Commission cemeteries that are dotted around northern France, quite literally in the middle of nowhere. So to Greenland Hill, where history has been hidden for a century. A motorway and a major rail thoroughfare now dissect this nondescript location. It really is difficult to comprehend today what really happened here. Total madness, suffering and sacrifice dished out by commanders who never visited the battlefields themselves. Their comprehension of events as they unfolded was cursory, blinded by their own ambitions and with scant, if any regard at all, for their own men. Of course, it didn't just happen here, but we use the senseless tragedy of Greenland Hill as an example of lions literally led by donkeys. There could be no excuse for the events of April the 12th after the slaughter of the previous day. So what did go wrong?
The men had to retreat from the sunken road before 0 hour. That was before the main attack had to commence. So they were on the back foot before they'd even started. To make matters worse, the Germans knew exactly where they were. They had them in full view from the 60-foot tower at the chemical works. Air superiority, the artillery had already got in range. It was now just down to the machine gunners to cut down the 9th Scottish Division when they came out of their trenches shortly afterward at 1700 hours. They didn't stand a chance.
The South Africans, just like their comrades from Scotland in the 9th Division, were proud and fearless men, recognised as amongst the bravest and most courageous volunteer soldiers ever to wear the uniform of the British Army. Their sacrifices, thankfully, have not been forgotten, nor should they ever be so.
You know, John, when you see a tower of stone like this, you tend not to pay it much attention. But actually, having been out with you today, it's hard to believe that sort of this tower of stone represents so much suffering.
That's right. This last tower of stone is the 9th Scottish Division Memorial. I'm sure after today you do know the sacrifice that it represents.
It's nice to see, like many of the other memorials that I've seen when I've been around France and Belgium, that it's not suffered any vandalism.
That's right. The respect here is great. And it'd be nice if some of our countrymen were better educated in the sacrifice of their forefathers, and perhaps our memorials wouldn't be damaged with the graffiti.
Point well made, John.
So where did the men who fought on the 12th of April come from? The 9th Scottish Rifles, the Cameronians. Men from the picturesque county of Lanarkshire, their headquarters at Hamilton, south of Glasgow. They were the first to lead the attack on Greenland Hill. In half an hour, they received 176 casualties. The 11th and 12th Royal Scots, Lothian men, many of them miners from the Edinburgh area. The 11th took 171 casualties, the 12th took a shocking 268. Between them, they received almost 100 fatalities. Many of them died, tangled in the defensive barbed wire. The 1st and 2nd South African Infantry. The 1st came from the Cape Province, city men from Port Elizabeth and Cape Town. The 2nd from Natal, the Garden Province and home of the Zulu Nation, and from the Orange Free State. They took over 500 casualties between them. Their advance checked within 100 metres. The bravest of men, much feared by the enemy. The kilted 4th South Africans, men mainly of Scots descent, the Transvaal Scottish, gold miners, and the Cape Town Highlanders, seafarers and farmers. Rugged men who received 206 casualties in that horrific half hour on a cold April evening. Not forgetting the Royal Army Medical Corps, who worked miracles that day under intense pressure, bringing in the dead and wounded. Woefully undermanned and unarmed, they prevented the horrendous death toll from rising even higher.
The German machine gunners held very accurate fire. They deliberately aimed at the midriff of the advancing troops, causing maximum physical damage. Unfortunately for the 9th Scottish Division, the facilities of medical provisions, stretcher bearers, etc. were woefully inadequate. They couldn't be rescued. Many of them lay dying of their wounds. They couldn't be saved. Once again, Allenby hadn't made adequate provision for those men. After the shocking events of the 12th of April, and indeed the previous day, you would have thought that Allenby, by then, would have taken stock of the situation. But almost unbelievably, he wanted to continue on the offensive. It took 3 of his subordinate generals, Robertson, Delisle and Wilkinson, to actually approach Haig to complain about Allenby's conduct. They could have been court-martialed for mutiny, but Haig listened.
Derris Memorial, on the outskirts of the town, bears the names of 35,000 British and Commonwealth servicemen whose bodies could not be found after the bloody fighting in this region. Some of those who perished on April the 12th have their names carved upon the walls here, token symbols of their ultimate sacrifice. Amongst them is the oldest man to die that day, a 47-year-old second lieutenant, Wilfrid Lees, of the South African Scottish, who had led his men over the top to oblivion. Sergeant Septimus Ledger, of the 2nd South Africans who suffered the most casualties on that day, is also commemorated here. He had been a South African rugby international, a strong and fit young man who played in the forward line. Another boy soldier who lied about his age also has his name carved upon a wall here. Paul Potgieter of the 1st South African Infantry also served under a false name. The 17-year-old has been lost forever. Like the rest of the soldiers named on the walls, he has no known grave.
The Arras Memorial, to the thousands of men whose bodies were never recovered from the battlefields. Many of the names here, men who died on that fateful day in April 1917. Men of the 9th Scottish Division, which of course included the South African Infantry. But also on the walls are the names of men from all over the Commonwealth. Men from New Zealand, Australia, Canada, to name but a few. Today, our brave soldiers continue to fight in conflicts around the world. Their sacrifices, although minuscule in number in comparison to the First World War, are just as important.
On November the 11th, 1918, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the end of the war came. It was too late for the 1 million men of Britain and the Commonwealth who gave their lives, many of them in circumstances beyond the imagination.
You are doing this for God and for your nation.
Faster! Faster, double! Move it!
What's happened to them now?
They're gone, sir. They're all gone.
For the men who made it home, life became harsh. In Britain, the promise of a land fit for heroes never did materialise. Hardship became a sudden reality. Hundreds of thousands of badly wounded men, amputees and those who had been gassed died prematurely, often in poverty. War widows in the thousands were forced to remarry working men of any age who could provide for them and their children, not always by choice. In an age of rudimentary provision of social care, no national health service or welfare state, it was asked, what did they die for? That question is still referred to in today's society.
After the war, the commander, Douglas Haig, received quite a nice bursary from the British government. He was already a wealthy man. But he devoted a lot of his time, in fact the rest of his life, toward the welfare of former servicemen. In fact, he set up the Haig Fund and Haig Homes. We still see the poppies today. And he was very instrumental in creating the Royal British Legion. Did Haig feel guilty for all the death and suffering on the Western Front? 1 million men from Britain and the Commonwealth perished, but many more from Germany and many more from France also did.
Edmund Allenby, like the vast majority of his fellow military commanders, came from the upper end of a social class system that for generations dominated British society. It can be said that he was never afraid to accept responsibility, and he certainly wasn't afraid to take risks as an army commander. Without a doubt, he, like many of his contemporaries at the higher end of the command structure, was totally detached from the common working class regular, territorial or volunteer soldier. This detachment allowed him to make decisions without exercising a consciousness of reality. Many would argue this detachment was necessary to make critical decisions that in real terms affected the outcome of a war that desperately raged out of control from almost the beginning. Allenby was a highly experienced commander, stern and forthright, who subscribed to strict discipline. These traits personally brought him success later in the war, and indeed later in life. His prosecution of the war on the Western Front, to which he was charged, left much to be desired. Allenby's attitude with regard to the general welfare of his men was very poor. His maverick and bold offensive nature unnecessarily cost the lives of many. Even after the debacles of April 11th and 12th, Allenby continued to order infantry attacks without artillery support. Men were expendable to Allenby, so long as victory could be assured. As commander of the Third Army on the Western Front, Allenby never distinguished himself as he wanted to. In his quest to do so, his poorly calculated judgment resulted in many instances of failure. Extremely capable officers, NCOs and ordinary soldiers were lost as a result of his decisions. On the Western Front in 1917, it came as no surprise when he was relieved of his duties.
In effect, Allenby was actually sacked by Field Marshal Haig. He then moved to another theatre of war to command the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, and he received great adulation for his conquests of Palestine and Syria. In fact, shortly after the war, he became a Field Marshal himself and a Viscount. But you've got to ask yourself the question, would he have been moved to that theatre of war if he hadn't have made the mistakes that he'd made on the Western Front at Arras in 1917?
Here on London's busy Oxford Street, people go about their business in freedom and with pleasure. People from different backgrounds, different cultures, different faiths. But it could so easily have been very different if the men from Britain and the Commonwealth hadn't fought to defend democracy all those years ago. Their sacrifice is a debt that will remain with the free people everywhere forever. It is a debt that can never be repaid. Taxi! Sometimes money isn't everything.